The morning shadows. Chloe stood on the edge of the pavement, her small figure dwarfed by the towering trees that lined the street. The morning air was damp, the remnants of last night's rain still clinging to the asphalt. She clutched the straps of her bright pink backpack tightly, her knuckles turning white as she stared down the road, waiting. Her heart thudded in her chest, each beat a loud echo in the quiet suburban morning. It wasn't the first time she'd been here, waiting like this. The bus was supposed to stop. It had stopped for her every morning for the first week of school. But then, inexplicably, it didn't. At first, Chloe thought it might be a mistake. Maybe the driver hadn't seen her. Maybe she'd stood in the wrong spot. She told herself it was an accident, but accidents don't happen every day. Now, as the unmistakable sound of the school bus's engine grew louder in the distance, her chest tightened. This time will be different, she told herself. This time it will stop. The yellow bus rounded the corner, the sunlight glinting off its wet surface. Chloe straightened her shoulders and stepped closer to the curb. Her heart raced, a flutter of hope and anxiety building in her chest. She raised a small hand to wave, her movements hesitant but deliberate. The bus didn't slow down. The driver's face, obscured by the glare of the windshield, remained fixated on the road ahead. The bus sped past her, splashing water onto the sidewalk as it rolled through a puddle. Chloe flinched, her sneakers soaked through, but she didn't move. Her arm dropped limply to her side as she watched the bus disappear around the corner, taking the laughter and chatter of the children inside with it. Chloe stood frozen, her stomach twisting in knots. Her vision blurred as tears pooled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't change anything. She tightened her grip on her backpack straps and turned around, her steps slow and heavy as she walked back toward home. Her house wasn't far from the bus stop, just a couple of blocks. Normally, the walk didn't bother her. Today, though, every step felt like a struggle. The weight of her soaked shoes, the wet slap of her socks against her feet, and the quiet ache in her chest made the journey feel endless. When she finally reached the front door, she hesitated. Inside, her mom, Donna, would be rushing to get ready for work. Donna worked long shifts as a nurse at the hospital and was usually out the door by the time Chloe left for school. Chloe didn't want to bother her with this. It wasn't a big deal. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. But as Chloe stepped inside, the warmth of the house wrapping around her like a blanket, she felt her resolve falter. "Sweetie?" Dana's voice came from the kitchen, light and warm, but tinged with the weariness of someone who hadn't slept enough. "That you? How was the bus ride?" Chloe froze, her damp shoes squeaking softly against the hardwood floor. She stared down at them, willing the words to come. She could tell her mom. She should tell her mom. But the words caught in her throat, tangled with embarrassment and frustration. "It was fine." Chloe mumbled finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Dana appeared in the doorway, holding her thermos of coffee. Her sharp eyes landed on Chloe immediately, scanning her face with the practiced precision of someone who had spent years reading patients' expressions. Chloe kept her head down, but Dana wasn't so easily fooled. "You sure?" Dana asked, stepping closer. "You seem off." "I'm just tired," Chloe replied quickly, forcing a smile. The effort felt exhausting, and she could tell it didn't reach her eyes. Dana didn't push further. She glanced at the clock and sighed. "I have to head out. You'll be okay?" Chloe nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine." Dana leaned down and kissed the top of Chloe's head, her lips warm against the damp strands of hair that had escaped from Chloe's ponytail. "There's leftovers in the fridge if you get hungry. Call me if you need anything, okay?" "Okay." With that, Dana grabbed her bag and coat, and the door clicked shut behind her. Chloe stood in the silence of the empty house, staring at the door long after her mom had left. She felt a strange mixture of relief and loneliness. The house, so quiet and still, felt too big for her alone. Chloe walked to the couch and sank into it, her backpack sliding off her shoulders and landing with a thud on the floor. She pulled out one of her astronomy books, flipping through its pages without really reading them. She loved space, loved imagining herself floating among the stars where nothing could touch her. But even the thought of galaxies and constellations couldn't distract her today. The image of the bus speeding past her replayed in her mind like a cruel loop. Why doesn't he stop? What did I do wrong? She tried to push the thoughts away, but they clung to her, refusing to let go. When the next morning came, Chloe stood at the bus stop again, her hands clenched at her sides. She had almost told her mom the truth last night, but had stopped herself at the last minute. She didn't want to worry Dana. Her mom had enough on her plate. The bus appeared in the distance, its bright yellow frame cutting through the gray morning mist. Chloe's chest tightened as it approached, her nails digging into her palms. She stepped forward, her heart pounding. This time, she told herself, this time it will stop. But it didn't. The bus whizzed past her, the driver's face set in the same unreadable expression as before. The children inside were nothing more than silhouettes behind the fogged windows, but Chloe imagined she could feel their eyes on her, imagined she could hear their laughter. She stood there, her shoes soaked from another puddle, her shoulders hunched against the weight of disappointment. This time, the tears came, hot and fast, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. She quickly wiped them away, her face burning with shame, even though no one was around to see. By the time she reached her house, her steps dragging against the pavement, Dana was already dressed for work. She was sipping her coffee by the counter when Chloe walked in. "You're home early," Dana said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "What's going on?" Chloe hesitated, her throat tightening. The words were there, just beneath the surface, but she couldn't make herself say them. "Mom," she finally whispered, her voice shaking. The bus didn't stop again. Dana froze, her coffee halfway to her lips. For a moment, there was silence. Then she set the cup down with a sharp clink and turned to face her daughter. "What do you mean it didn't stop?" she asked, her voice low and steady, though Chloe could hear the edge of anger creeping into it. Chloe's eyes filled with tears again as she told her mom everything. This time, she didn't hold back. And as Dana's expression hardened with each word, Chloe felt the smallest flicker of hope. Maybe now, something would change. Ripples in the rain. The next morning dawned with a heavy gray sky, the clouds swollen with the promise of more rain. Chloe sat at the kitchen table, staring into her bowl of cereal. The milk had gone soggy, but she hadn't taken a single bite. Across from her, Dana sipped her coffee, her eyes sharp and alert despite her exhaustion. The tension in the air was palpable, a storm brewing between them as much as in the skies outside. Donna had spent the previous evening on the phone, her voice rising with every call she made. First, it was the school's transportation office, then the principal, then back to the transportation office. Chloe had listened from her bedroom, her stomach twisting as her mother's frustration grew louder with every conversation. She had heard words like protocol and investigation repeated over and over, but they felt empty, like placeholders for real action. Now, as Donna set her coffee cup down with a decisive thud, Chloe felt the weight of her mom's determination settle over her like a blanket. Dana wasn't the type to let things slide. She was fiercely protective, a force of nature when it came to her daughter. But Chloe couldn't shake the gnawing worry that maybe even her mom couldn't fix this. "I'm driving you to school again today," Donna announced, breaking the silence. Her tone brooked no argument, but Chloe hadn't been planning to argue anyway. Chloe nodded, keeping her eyes on her cereal. "Okay. And after I drop you off," Donna continued, "I'm going straight to the district office. I'm not waiting around for them to call me back anymore." Chloe glanced up, surprised. "The district office?" Dana nodded, her jaw tight. "This isn't just about the bus driver anymore. It's about accountability. Someone needs to explain why this is happening." Chloe didn't know what to say. She wanted to believe her mom could make a difference, but the knot in her stomach told her not to get her hopes up. Instead, she focused on finishing her cereal, forcing herself to eat even though the food tasted like cardboard in her mouth. The drive to school was quiet. Rain spattered against the windshield, the rhythmic sound a backdrop to their unspoken thoughts. Dana's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. Chloe stared out the window, watching the world blur past. The streets were familiar, but today they felt different, heavier somehow. When they arrived at the school, Dana pulled into the drop-off lane and put the car in park. She turned to Chloe, her expression softening. "I want you to have a good day, sweetie. Don't worry about the bus. I'll handle it." Chloe nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Thanks, Mom." Dana reached over and gave Chloe's hand a gentle squeeze. "We'll figure this out, I promise." Chloe forced a small smile before slipping out of the car. As she walked toward the school building, she felt the familiar weight of anxiety settle over her. The hallways were crowded with kids laughing and chatting, their voices bouncing off the walls. Chloe kept her head down, weaving through the throng of students like a ghost. She reached her locker and fumbled with the combination, her hands shaking slightly. The morning passed in a haze. Chloe couldn't focus on her lessons. Her teachers' voices sounded distant, their words blending together into a meaningless drone. She kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes until lunch. When the bell finally rang, she grabbed her lunchbox and headed outside, seeking the solace of her usual spot under a tree in the far corner of the schoolyard. As she sat down, the rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Chloe didn't bother to move. She didn't mind the rain. In some ways, it felt comforting, like it understood her better than the bright, sunny days ever could. She pulled out her sketchbook and began to draw, her pencil moving across the page in smooth, deliberate strokes. The image of a swirling galaxy took shape, its stars and planets spinning in a dance that felt both chaotic and serene. "Hey." Chloe looked up, startled. Maya stood a few feet away, holding her lunch tray. Her hair was damp from the rain, but she didn't seem to care. "Mind if I sit here?" Chloe hesitated. Maya was nice enough, but they weren't exactly close. Still, Chloe couldn't think of a reason to say no. She nodded, scooting over to make room. Maya sat down and set her tray on the grass. "What are you drawing?" Chloe held up her sketchbook, her cheeks flushing slightly. "It's, a galaxy." Maya's eyes lit up. "That's amazing. You're really talented." Chloe shrugged, but a small smile tugged at her lips. "Thanks." They sat in silence for a while, the rain falling softly around them. Maya started talking about her weekend, about a movie she'd seen, and a new video game she was excited to try. Chloe listened, nodding occasionally, but her mind kept drifting back to the bus. Finally, Maya turned to her, her brow furrowed. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Chloe tensed. "Yeah." "Why doesn't the bus stop for you?" Chloe's stomach dropped. She hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone ask her about it. She looked away, her fingers gripping the edges of her sketchbook. "I don't know," she said softly. Maya frowned. "That's messed up. Have you told anyone?" Chloe nodded. "My mom's trying to fix it." "Well, good," Maya said firmly, "because that's not okay." Chloe didn't respond. She appreciated Maya's support, but it didn't make the knot in her stomach go away. That evening, Dana returned home looking more tired than Chloe had ever seen her. She dropped her bag on the kitchen counter and sank into a chair, letting out a long sigh. "How did it go?" Chloe asked cautiously. Dana rubbed her temples. "The district office was frustrating. They kept giving me the same runaround. But I'm not giving up. I've scheduled a meeting with the head of transportation tomorrow." Chloe's heart sank. "Do you think it'll help?" Dana's eyes met hers, filled with determination. "It has to. I won't let this continue, Chloe. You deserve better." Chloe nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to believe her mom, but the doubts lingered. As she climbed into bed that night, the rain still falling softly outside her window, she couldn't shake the feeling that this battle was far from over. Unseen battles. The rain continued its relentless patter against the window the next morning as Chloe stirred awake. The sound was soothing but heavy, like a distant echo of her worries. She pulled the blanket over her head, wishing she could stay in bed forever, safe from the questions and the stares. But the world outside wouldn't stop moving, and neither could she. Downstairs, the smell of coffee and eggs wafted through the air. Chloe descended the stairs slowly, her footsteps quiet against the wooden floor. Dana was already at the table, her phone resting beside her plate of half-eaten toast. Her brow was furrowed in thought, a deep line creased between her eyes. "Morning, sweetie," Dana said, offering a tired smile as Chloe entered the kitchen. "I made you some eggs. They're on the stove." Chloe nodded, grabbing a plate and serving herself in silence. She sat across from her mom, the tension between them like an invisible wall. "Big day today," Dana said after a moment, her tone light but strained. "I'm meeting with the head of transportation at 10. I got my notes ready, and I'm not leaving that office until I get answers." Chloe pushed her eggs around her plate with her fork. "What if they don't do anything?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dana's expression hardened. "Then I'll take it higher. The superintendent, the school board, whoever I need to. But we'll get to the bottom of this, Chloe. I promise." Chloe nodded, but her stomach still churned with unease. She knew her mom meant well, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the system was bigger than both of them, a machine too vast and indifferent to be swayed by one person's determination. Dana reached across the table and squeezed Chloe's hand. "It's going to be okay," she said softly. "You don't have to carry this alone." Chloe managed a small smile, though the weight in her chest remained. The drive to school was filled with the same heavy silence as the day before. The rain blurred the world outside the car windows, turning the familiar streets into a watery dreamscape. Dana's grip on the steering wheel was tight, her knuckles pale against the dark leather. Chloe stared out the window, her hands clasped in her lap. When they reached the school, Dana turned to her daughter with a look of quiet resolve. "I'll pick you up again this afternoon," she said, "and I'll let you know how the meeting goes." Chloe nodded, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Okay, thanks, Mom." Dana leaned over and kissed Chloe's forehead. "Have a good day, sweetheart. Try not to worry." Chloe stepped out of the car, the rain immediately soaking through her hood. She hurried toward the school building, her shoes squelching against the wet pavement. The hallways inside were warm and noisy, a stark contrast to the gloomy weather outside. But Chloe didn't feel any comfort as she made her way to her locker. The morning classes dragged on, each lesson blending into the next. Chloe tried to focus, but her mind kept drifting back to the bus. She replayed the scene over and over in her head. The bus speeding past her, the driver's gaze fixed straight ahead, the children's faces obscured by fogged windows. It felt like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. By lunchtime, Chloe felt drained. She grabbed her lunchbox and headed to her usual spot under the tree. Despite the damp grass and the drizzle that still lingered in the air, she needed the quiet, the solitude. She was halfway through her sandwich when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Maya standing there, her tray balanced in one hand and an umbrella in the other. "Mind if I join you?" Maya asked. Chloe hesitated, but then nodded. Maya plopped down beside her, unfazed by the wet ground. She opened her umbrella and held it over both of them, the gesture surprising Chloe with its thoughtfulness. "Thanks," Chloe said softly. Maya shrugged. "No problem. So, any updates on the bus situation?" Chloe stiffened. "Not really. My mom's meeting with someone about it today." "Good," Maya said firmly, "because that's messed up. They can't just ignore you like that." Chloe didn't respond. She appreciated Maya's support, but talking about it only made her feel more vulnerable, more exposed. Maya seemed to sense her discomfort, and changed the subject. "Hey, I saw your drawing the other day. That galaxy thing. It was awesome. You're really talented." Chloe felt a flicker of pride, but quickly pushed it down. "Thanks," she mumbled. "You ever think about doing art for a living?" Maya asked, her tone genuine. Chloe shrugged. "Maybe. I don't know." Maya grinned. "Well, you should. You've got a gift." Chloe smiled faintly, her mood lifting ever so slightly. For a moment, the weight in her chest didn't feel so heavy. That afternoon, Dana arrived at the school earlier than usual. Chloe spotted her car in the pickup line and hurried over, her heart pounding with anticipation. As she slid into the passenger seat, she glanced at her mom, searching for any hint of how the meeting had gone. Dana's expression was calm but serious. "How was your day?" she asked, her tone measured. "Okay," Chloe said cautiously. "How did the meeting go?" Dana let out a long breath. "It was complicated. The head of transportation apologized and said they'd address the issue with the driver. They'd promised to send someone to observe the route tomorrow morning." Chloe frowned. "Do you think it'll help?" "I don't know," Dana admitted, "but at least it's a start." Chloe nodded, though her chest still felt tight. She wanted to believe her mom, but the doubt lingered. What if nothing changed? What if the bus never stopped for her again? Dana reached over and squeezed Chloe's shoulder. "We're not giving up, okay? No matter what happens, we'll keep fighting." Chloe managed a small smile. "Okay." As they drove home, the rain finally began to let up, the clouds breaking apart to reveal patches of pale blue sky. But for Chloe, the storm wasn't over. It was still there, a quiet tempest raging inside her. And though she didn't know how or when it would end, she held on to the one thing that gave her hope: her mom's unwavering determination to make things right. Cracks in the system. The sun peeked through a sliver of blue sky the next morning, though the air still carried the chill of the recent rain. Chloe stood at the bus stop, her pink backpack snug against her shoulders. Her shoes were still damp from the day before, the memory of standing in the rain while the bus sped past her like a ghost pressing heavily on her mind. This morning felt different. Her mom had assured her that someone from the district's transportation office would be observing the bus route today. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the day the bus finally stopped. Chloe clutched the straps of her backpack, her fingers trembling slightly as she stared down the road. In the distance, the yellow bus appeared, its bright colors stark against the grayish morning. Chloe stepped closer to the curb, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the low rumble of the engine, the familiar sound sending a wave of anxiety coursing through her. "This time," she thought, "this time it'll stop." But as the bus neared, Chloe's chest tightened. The driver's gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, his expression unreadable. The bus didn't slow down. It didn't even pause. It rolled past her in a blur of yellow and black, spraying the remnants of a puddle onto the sidewalk as it went. Chloe stood frozen, her stomach twisting into knots. She couldn't believe it. After everything her mom had done, after all the promises from the school and the transportation office, it had happened again. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back, her jaw tightening. She wouldn't cry. Not again. Her shoulders slumped as she turned away from the empty street, the distant hum of the bus fading into silence. The walk home felt endless, her feet dragging against the pavement. She could already imagine her mom's reaction. The sharp flash of anger, the determination in her voice as she promised to escalate things further. But what more could they do? The system didn't seem to care. When Chloe stepped through the front door, Dana was waiting in the kitchen, her phone in hand and a mug of coffee growing cold on the counter. She looked up immediately, her eyes narrowing as she took in Chloe's damp shoes and downcast expression. "It didn't stop," Chloe said quietly, setting her backpack on the floor. Dana's face hardened, a mix of anger and frustration flickering across her features. She set her phone down with a sharp clatter and crossed the room to kneel in front of Chloe. "Sweetie, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice soft but trembling with emotion. "I can't believe this is still happening." Chloe shrugged, trying to seem unaffected. "It's fine." "It's not fine," Dana said firmly, her hands resting on Chloe's shoulders. "You shouldn't have to deal with this. No child should." Chloe looked away, her throat tightening. She didn't want to talk about it anymore. She just wanted it to stop. Dana stood up and grabbed her phone. "That's it," she muttered. "I'm calling the principal again. And the transportation office. And the school board if I have to." Chloe watched as her mom paced the kitchen, her fingers flying over the phone screen. A part of her felt guilty for putting Dana through this. Her mom already worked long hours at the hospital, barely getting enough sleep as it was. Now she was spending what little free time she had fighting a battle that felt impossible to win. Dana dialed the number for the transportation office and pressed the phone to her ear. Chloe could hear the faint sound of a voice on the other end as someone answered. "This is Dana Jenkins," her mom began, her tone sharp and professional. "I'm calling again about the ongoing issue with the bus driver on Route 17. Despite your assurances that this would be resolved, the bus once again failed to stop for my daughter this morning." Chloe listened as Dana laid out the details of the situation, her voice growing more forceful with each passing moment. But even as her mom fought for her, Chloe felt a sinking sense of futility. She'd heard these conversations before, heard the same promises and excuses from the people in charge. What if nothing ever changed? Later that afternoon, Dana picked Chloe up from school as usual. Her mom's face was set in a mask of calm determination, but Chloe could sense the frustration simmering beneath the surface. "I spoke to the transportation office again," Dana said as they pulled out of the school parking lot. "They're claiming the driver didn't see you. But I don't believe that. How could he miss you standing there every morning?" Chloe didn't respond. She stared out the window, her thoughts a swirling mess of anger, sadness, and confusion. "I also called the principal," Dana continued. "He said he's going to meet with the driver personally tomorrow. But I'm not holding my breath." Chloe glanced at her mom, surprised by the bitterness in her voice. Dana was usually so optimistic, so confident in her ability to make things right. Seeing her like this made Chloe's chest ache. "Mom," Chloe said hesitantly, What if it's not a mistake?" Dana's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "What do you mean?" Chloe hesitated, her heart pounding. "What if he's doing it on purpose? What if he doesn't want to stop for me?" Dana's eyes flashed with anger. "That's not acceptable," she said firmly. "If that's the case, then he shouldn't be driving the school bus. Period." Chloe nodded, but her stomach still churned. She wanted to believe her mom could fix this, but the doubt lingered like a dark cloud that wouldn't go away. That evening, Dana sat at the kitchen table with a notebook spread out in front of her. She was writing down every detail of the past few weeks. The dates and times the bus had passed Chloe by, the names of the people she had spoken to, and the promises they had made. She was building a case, preparing for what she knew would be an uphill battle. Chloe sat across from her, watching as her mom scribbled furiously. "Do you think it'll help?" she asked quietly. Dana looked up, her eyes fierce. "I don't know, but I'm not giving up, Chloe. Not until this is fixed." Chloe nodded, her chest tightening with a mix of gratitude and guilt. She didn't know how to thank her mom for everything she was doing. All she could do was hope that it would be enough. The next morning, Chloe stood at the bus stop again, her heart pounding as the bus approached. This time, a man in a reflective vest stood across the street, clipboard in hand. He was the district observer her mom had mentioned, here to monitor the route. As the bus neared, Chloe stepped forward, her eyes locked on the driver. The bus slowed down slightly, but then, to her horror, it sped up again, zooming past her without stopping. The man with the clipboard frowned, jotting something down. Chloe's hands clenched into fists as she watched the bus disappear. She turned and walked home, the familiar weight settling over her shoulders. When she stepped inside, Dana was already on the phone. Her mom's voice was calm but icy, each word carefully measured. "I want answers," Dana said firmly. "Not excuses. This is unacceptable, and I won't stop until something is done." Chloe stood in the doorway, her heart heavy. She wanted to believe her mom could fix this, but a part of her couldn't help wondering if the system was too broken to change. Beneath the surface, the following day was overcast, a slate-gray sky stretching endlessly overhead. Chloe stood at the bus stop once again, her hands buried deep in the pockets of her jacket. The previous morning's events had left her more shaken than she wanted to admit. Even with an official observer present, the bus had passed her by as if she were invisible. It was a reminder of how powerless she felt, how little her presence seemed to matter in the grand scheme of things. Across the street, the man with the reflective vest was back, clipboard in hand. He gave her a small nod when he noticed her looking, but Chloe didn't nod back. She didn't trust him. Not yet. His presence hadn't changed anything yesterday. Why should today be any different? The faint rumble of the bus engine reached her ears, and her body tensed. She stepped closer to the curb, her heart pounding in her chest. This time, she told herself, this time, it has to stop. The yellow bus came into view, rolling steadily down the road. Chloe raised her hand, signaling to the driver. The bus slowed as it approached, her heart leaping with cautious hope. But then, just as the bus reached her, it picked up speed again, roaring past her without hesitation. Chloe stared after it, her stomach twisting with a mix of anger and despair. Across the street, the observer furiously jotted down notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. But Chloe didn't care about his notes or his clipboard. None of it seemed to matter. By the time she got home, her shoes were soaked, her socks squelching with every step. Dana was already waiting in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. Her face was taut with frustration, her free hand clenched into a fist. "She's been standing there every morning," Dana said, her voice rising. "Your observer saw it with his own eyes, and yet the bus driver still refuses to stop. This is beyond unacceptable." Chloe set her backpack down quietly, not wanting to interrupt. She slipped into the living room and sank onto the couch, her head resting against the cushions. She closed her eyes, letting the sound of her mom's voice wash over her. It was comforting, in a strange way, to hear Dana fighting for her, but it also made her feel small, like a problem her mom had to solve. After what felt like an eternity, Dana hung up the phone and walked into the living room. She sat down beside Chloe, her expression softening. "They're launching a formal investigation," Dana said, her voice gentler now. "The observer filed his report this morning. He said there's no reason the bus shouldn't be stopping for you." Chloe nodded, her throat tight. "Do you think it'll change anything?" Dana hesitated, and in that moment, Chloe saw the crack in her mother's confidence. "It has to," Dana said finally. "I won't let them sweep this under the rug." The next morning, Dana drove Chloe to school herself. As they pulled into the parking lot, Dana glanced at her daughter, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm meeting with the principal and the transportation director this afternoon," Dana said. "I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm proud of you. You've been so strong through all of this." Chloe managed a small smile. "Thanks, Mom." As she stepped out of the car and walked toward the school building, Chloe felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe this time, things would be different. Dana's meeting with the principal and the transportation director was scheduled for 1:00 p.m. She arrived 15 minutes early, her notebook and a folder of documents clutched tightly in her hands. The office was quiet, the receptionist glancing up briefly before returning to her computer. "Miss Jenkins," a voice called from down the hall. Dana turned to see Mr. Thompson, the principal, approaching her. His smile was polite but strained. "We're ready for you." Dana followed him into the conference room, where the transportation director, Mr. Reyes, was already seated. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair and a clipboard resting in front of him. Dana took a seat across from them, her spine straight, her gaze unwavering. "Thank you for coming in," Mr. Thompson began, his tone conciliatory. "We understand this has been a frustrating experience for you and your daughter." "Frustrating doesn't even begin to cover it," Dana said, her voice steady but laced with anger. "My daughter has been ignored by your bus driver for weeks, despite multiple calls, reports, and even an observer on site. Nothing has changed. I'm here because I need answers." Mr. Reyes cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the observer's report, Ms. Jenkins," he said. "It's clear that the driver has been neglecting his duties. We've spoken to him, and he claims—" "I don't care what he claims," Dana interrupted, her eyes flashing. "My daughter is being left out in the cold every morning. This isn't about excuses or justifications. It's about accountability." Mr. Reyes shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We take this very seriously," he said. "The driver will be reassigned to a different route while we continue the investigation." Dana's jaw tightened. "And what about my daughter? What assurance do I have that this won't happen again?" "We're implementing additional oversight on Route 17, Mr. Reyes said. "A substitute driver will take over temporarily, and will ensure the route is properly observed going forward." Dana leaned forward, her voice sharp. "That's a start, but it's not enough. I want to know why this happened in the first place. Was it negligence? Bias? Something else? I won't rest until I have the full truth." Mr. Thompson raised his hands in a calming gesture. "We're committed to finding those answers, Ms. Jenkins. Please trust that we're doing everything we can." Dana sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "I'll hold you to that," she said finally. When Dana picked Chloe up from school that afternoon, her face was a mix of exhaustion and resolve. "How did it go?" Chloe asked cautiously. "They're taking action," Dana said. "The driver is being reassigned, and they're bringing in someone else for your route. They also promised to investigate why this happened." Chloe nodded, a small glimmer of relief washing over her. "Do you think it's over?" Dana reached over and squeezed Chloe's hand. "Not yet," she said, "but we're getting closer." For the first time in weeks, Chloe felt a flicker of hope that things might actually get better. But beneath that hope, a quiet question lingered. Why had this happened in the first place? And would the truth ever come to light? A new dawn. The morning sky was streaked with shades of orange and pink as the sun began its slow rise over the horizon. For the first time in weeks, Chloe felt a cautious sense of optimism as she stood at the bus stop. Her pink backpack was snug against her shoulders, her hair neatly braided, and her sneakers dry for a change. Today was supposed to be the day a new driver took over her route, the day things would finally go back to normal. But as the minutes ticked by and the familiar sound of the bus engine grew louder in the distance, Chloe's stomach twisted with nerves. She shuffled her feet, glancing over her shoulder at Dana, who stood by the front window of their house, watching her. Her mom's presence, even from afar, gave her a small sense of security. The bus appeared, rounding the corner with a steady hum. This time, Chloe noticed subtle differences: the driver's posture, the slower pace of the bus as it approached. Her heart thudded in her chest as the bus came closer. She raised her hand in a small wave, her breath catching. The bus slowed to a stop right in front of her. Chloe froze, unsure for a moment if this was real. The door hissed open, and a woman with short, curly hair and a warm smile leaned out. "Good morning," the woman said. "You must be Chloe. Hop on in." Chloe hesitated for just a second before stepping onto the bus. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the metal steps as she climbed aboard. The woman's smile didn't waver, and something about her kind eyes made Chloe feel at ease. "I'm Ms. Perez," the driver said. "I'll be driving this route from now on. Let's make it a great day, okay?" Chloe nodded, her voice catching as she murmured, "Thank you." She walked down the aisle, her gaze darting nervously toward the other kids. Some of them barely glanced at her, while others offered tentative smiles or nods. Chloe found an empty seat near the middle and slid in, gripping her backpack tightly on her lap. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she belonged. At school, the day seemed to pass in a blur. Chloe tried to focus on her lessons, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the bus. The way it had stopped for her, the way Ms. Perez had smiled at her, it felt almost too good to be true. She didn't want to get her hopes up too high, but she couldn't deny the relief that had settled in her chest. At lunch, Maya joined her under the tree again. This time, Chloe greeted her with a small smile. "So, how was the new driver?" Maya asked, taking a bite of her sandwich. Chloe shrugged, trying to play it cool. "She's nice. She actually stopped for me." "About time," Maya said, rolling her eyes. "I can't believe it took them this long to fix it." Chloe nodded, but she didn't say anything. She wasn't ready to talk about everything that had happened, not yet. For now, she just wanted to enjoy the fact that things seemed to be getting better. That evening, Dana was already home when Chloe walked through the front door. Her mom looked up from the table, where she was reviewing patient files for her next shift. "How was the new driver?" Dana asked, her tone careful but hopeful. Chloe set her backpack down and walked over to the table. "She stopped," she said simply, her voice quiet. Dana let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Good," she said, her lips curving into a relieved smile. "That's good." Chloe hesitated, then added, "She was nice too." Dana reached across the table and took Chloe's hand in hers. "I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "You've been so strong through all of this." Chloe felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered. The next few days passed without incident. The bus continued to stop for Chloe every morning, and Miss Perez greeted her with the same warm smile each time. At school, Chloe began to feel more at ease, even starting to participate in class discussions and talk to some of her classmates. The weight she'd been carrying for so long was beginning to lift. But Dana wasn't done. She had promised Chloe answers, and she intended to keep that promise. A week later, Dana received a call from Mr. Rice, the transportation director. He sounded more subdued than usual, his tone laced with a hint of discomfort. "Ms. Jenkins," he began, "we've completed our investigation into the issue with the previous driver." Dana straightened in her chair, her grip on the phone tightening. "And?" "There was a pattern of neglect in the driver's behavior," Mr. Rice admitted. "He has been terminated from his position." Dana's jaw tightened. "Neglect. That's all you're calling it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. There were also some concerns raised about bias. Mr. Rice said carefully, "We're implementing mandatory training for all of our drivers to address these issues moving forward." Dana felt a surge of anger, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Bias against who?" "My daughter specifically. Or kids like her." "Ms. Jenkins," Mr. Rice said, his tone placating, "I assure you, we're taking this very seriously." "You'd better be," Dana said sharply, "because if I hear about anything like this happening again, to my daughter or anyone else, I won't hesitate to take legal action." After hanging up, Dana sat in silence for a moment, her emotions swirling. She was relieved that the driver had been removed, but the revelation of bias left a bitter taste in her mouth. She couldn't shake the thought of how many other kids might have been affected by the same behavior. That evening, Dana sat Chloe down at the kitchen table. "I have some news," she said carefully. Chloe's brow furrowed. "What is it?" "The driver. He's not coming back," Dana said. "They found evidence that he wasn't just neglecting his duties. He was targeting certain kids like you." Chloe's chest tightened. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dana reached across the table and took her hand. "Because some people are ignorant and cruel," she said honestly. "But that's their problem, not yours. You did nothing wrong, Chloe. None of this was your fault." Chloe nodded slowly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thanks, Mom." Dana squeezed her hand. "We're going to keep fighting, Chloe. Not just for you, but for every kid who deserves to feel safe and respected." Chloe managed a small smile. Okay. As the days turned into weeks, life began to settle into a new normal. The bus continued to stop for Chloe, and Ms. Perez greeted her warmly every morning. At school, Chloe felt more confident, more secure. And at home, Dana never stopped advocating for Chloe, for justice, and for the changes that would ensure no child ever had to face what her daughter had endured. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a new beginning. And for Chloe and Dana, that was enough. Beyond the bus stop, months had passed since the incident with the bus driver, but its effects lingered in subtle, sometimes unexpected ways. The mornings had grown colder, with frost clinging to the edges of leaves and the faint smell of winter in the air. Chloe stood at the bus stop, her pink scarf wrapped snugly around her neck. She looked up the road, her posture still slightly tense as the rumble of the bus's engine grew louder. But when the familiar yellow vehicle slowed to a stop in front of her, she felt the tension melt away. "Good morning, Chloe," Ms. Perez called out, her warm smile as bright as ever. "Good morning," Chloe replied, stepping onto the bus. She scanned the rows of seats, the noise of chatting kids filling the air, and found her usual spot near the middle. It felt almost normal now, almost like the weeks of being ignored had never happened. Almost. But the memories of standing alone on the sidewalk, the sting of being unseen, still lingered in her mind. They weren't as sharp as they had been, but they were there, tucked away in the corners of her thoughts. At school, Chloe's days had transformed. The quiet, withdrawn girl who had once kept her head down and avoided eye contact was now raising her hand in class and laughing with her friends at lunch. Maya had become her closest confidant, and they often spent their breaks huddled under their favorite tree, talking about everything from school projects to dreams for the future. "You're really good at drawing, you know," Maya said one afternoon, watching as Chloe sketched a sprawling cityscape in her notebook. "You should enter the art contest they're hosting next month." Chloe looked up, surprised. "What contest?" Maya grinned. "The one for the Winter Festival. They're asking students to submit artwork that shows what community means to them. You'd win for sure." Chloe hesitated, her pencil hovering over the page. The idea of sharing her art with the entire school was both exciting and terrifying. "I don't know," she said softly. "What if they don't like it?" "Then they're crazy," Maya said firmly. "Come on, Chloe. You've been through way tougher stuff than this. What's a little art contest compared to all that?" Chloe thought about it, a small smile tugging at her lips. Maya was right. She had faced things she never thought she could handle, and she had come out stronger. Maybe it was time to let herself take a chance. That evening, Chloe told her mom about the contest over dinner. Dana's face lit up with pride. "You should absolutely enter," Dana said. "Your art is amazing, Chloe. And you have a lot to say about community." Chloe nodded, her heart swelling with warmth at her mom's support. "Thanks, Mom." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Chloe spent hours working on her piece, pouring her heart into every detail. She decided to create a sprawling scene of a neighborhood. Kids playing on sidewalks, neighbors chatting on porches, and a bus stopping at every corner. In the background, the sun rose over a sky filled with stars, a nod to her love of astronomy. As she worked, she thought about what community meant to her. It wasn't just about being surrounded by people. It was about being seen, being valued. It was about her mom's unwavering fight for her, Maya's constant encouragement, and even Ms. Perez's kind smile every morning. All of that went into her artwork, layer by layer, until it felt complete. The day of the Winter Festival arrived, and the school gymnasium buzzed with energy. Students, parents, and teachers mingled among the rows of art displays, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Chloe stood near her piece, her stomach a bundle of nerves. The drawing had been mounted on an easel, its vibrant colors standing out against the white walls of the gym. "You're going to win," Maya whispered, standing beside her. "I can feel it." Chloe smiled, though her heart raced. She glanced around, her eyes scanning the crowd for her mom. Dana had promised to be there, but her shift at the hospital had run late, and Chloe was starting to worry she wouldn't make it in time. Just as the judges approached her display, Chloe spotted Dana rushing through the doors, her coat still damp from the snow outside. Their eyes met, and Dana gave her an encouraging nod, mouthing, "You've got this." The head judge, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and a thoughtful expression, studied Chloe's piece for a long moment. "This is beautiful," she said finally, her voice warm. "Can you tell us about it?" Chloe swallowed her nerves and stepped forward. "It's about community," she began, "about what it means to feel like you belong. I think sometimes we forget how important it is to notice the people around us, to make them feel seen. This drawing is my way of showing what that looks like to me." The judge nodded, a soft smile on her lips. "Thank you for sharing that." Later that evening, as the festival wound down and the winners were announced, Chloe stood on the edge of the crowd, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. When they called her name for first place, the applause was deafening. Maya whooped loudly, and Dana's eyes filled with tears as Chloe walked up to accept her ribbon. As she stood on the stage, her heart swelling with pride, Chloe realized something. The bus had stopped being the defining moment of her life. It had been a struggle, yes, but it had also taught her something valuable, that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined, that she could face challenges and still rise. Over the next few weeks, Chloe's artwork was displayed in the school's front office, where students and visitors could see it every day. Her story spread through the community, sparking conversations about inclusion, visibility, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Dana continued to advocate for systemic changes in the school district, joining a parent advisory committee to ensure that no child would ever feel ignored again. As winter turned to spring, Chloe found herself standing at the bus stop one morning, the sunlight warm on her face. Ms. Perez pulled up, her usual smile lighting up her face. "Morning, Chloe," she said. "Morning, Ms. Perez," Chloe replied, climbing aboard. As she settled into her seat, Chloe glanced out the window at her neighborhood, the houses bathed in golden light. She thought about how much had changed since that first morning when the bus had sped past her. She thought about her mom's fierce determination, Maya's unwavering friendship, and her own quiet strength, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The road ahead was wide and open, and Chloe was ready for whatever came next. Rising beyond. As spring gave way to summer, Chloe's life began to blossom in ways she had never anticipated. The memory of the bus incident still lingered in the corners of her mind, but they no longer haunted her. They had become part of her story, a chapter that shaped her but didn't define her. With each passing day, she found herself looking forward, not just to mornings at the bus stop or afternoons at school, but to a future she was beginning to imagine for herself. The ripples of advocacy. Dana's work on the Parent Advisory Committee had gained momentum. After her persistent advocacy, the school district implemented sweeping changes to its transportation policies. They introduced bias awareness training for all bus drivers, ensuring that no child would ever be overlooked again. Regular evaluations and feedback sessions were mandated, creating a culture of accountability that hadn't existed before. Dana was often invited to speak at community meetings and parent-teacher associations, sharing her experiences and encouraging other parents to advocate for their children. She was becoming a local figure of resilience and justice, a role she hadn't sought but embraced wholeheartedly. Chloe attended one of these meetings for the first time that summer. She sat in the back of the community center, her sketchbook on her lap, as her mom stood at the podium. "My daughter taught me something invaluable," Dana said, her voice clear and steady. "She taught me that being seen and valued isn't just about who notices you. It's about the strength you find within yourself to demand the respect you deserve. I fought for her, yes, but she fought too. And that fight is what inspires me every day." The room erupted in applause, and Chloe felt her cheeks flush with pride. As Dana stepped down from the podium, she caught Chloe's eye and smiled, a silent acknowledgement of everything they'd been through together. An unexpected opportunity. A few weeks later, Chloe was sitting under her favorite tree in the park, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. The summer sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows across the grass. She had been working on a new piece, a vibrant depiction of her neighborhood at sunrise. She wanted to capture the way the light seemed to touch everything, the way it made even the most ordinary moments feel extraordinary. "Excuse me," a voice said, interrupting her concentration. Chloe looked up to see a woman with a camera slung over her shoulder and a notepad in her hand. She was tall and elegant, her short hair streaked with silver. She smiled warmly at Chloe. "Are you Chloe Jenkins?" the woman asked. Chloe blinked, startled. Yes." The woman extended her hand. "My name's Margaret Rowe. I'm a journalist with the local paper. I've heard about your story, about the bus and the changes your mom helped bring about. And I'd love to write a feature on you." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. "Me? But my mom's the one. Whoa. Your mom is incredible," Margaret said, cutting her off gently. "But this story is as much about you as it is about her. Your art, your resilience, your perspective. It's inspiring. I think people need to hear it." Chloe hesitated, her fingers gripping the edges of her sketchbook. She wasn't sure she was ready to share her story with the world. But then she thought about everything her mom had said, about the power of being seen and valued. Maybe this was her chance to step into that light. "Okay," Chloe said finally, her voice soft but steady. "I'll do it." The feature, the article, appeared in the Sunday edition of the local paper, accompanied by a full-color photo of Chloe sitting under her tree, her sketchbook open to the piece she'd been working on in the park. The headline read, "A Young Artist's Journey: How Resilience Turned a Struggle into Change." The article detailed Chloe's experiences, from the mornings spent at the bus stop to her artwork at the Winter Festival. It highlighted the systemic changes Dana had helped bring about and celebrated Chloe's emerging role as an advocate and artist. The response was overwhelming. Teachers, neighbors, and even strangers stopped Chloe in the hallways or on the street to tell her how much her story had moved them. Kids at school who had never spoken to her before asked to sit with her at lunch, curious about her art and her experiences. For the first time in her life, Chloe felt like more than just a face in the crowd. She felt seen. Art and aspiration. As the summer wore on, Chloe threw herself into her art. She started attending a weekend art class at the local community center, where she met other kids who shared her passion. They encouraged her to experiment with new techniques, and Chloe discovered a love for painting that she hadn't explored before. One day, her art teacher, Mrs. Lane, pulled her aside after class. "Chloe, have you ever thought about applying to an art academy?" Mrs. Lane asked. Chloe stared at her, stunned. "An academy? I don't think I'm good enough for something like that." Mrs. Lane smiled. "You're more than good enough. There's a program at the city's fine arts school for young artists like you. They're looking for students who have a unique perspective, and your work speaks volumes." Chloe's mind raced. The idea of attending an art academy was both thrilling and terrifying. But as she thought about it, she realized that every step she had taken over the past year, from speaking out about the bus to entering the Winter Festival, had been about embracing new challenges. This could be her next step. "I'll think about it," Chloe said, her voice tinged with excitement. A new beginning. By the time school started again in the fall, Chloe had submitted her application to the Fine Arts program. The process was nerve-wracking, but her mom and Maya were there every step of the way, cheering her on. When the acceptance letter arrived, Chloe could hardly believe her eyes. She read it 3 times before running into the kitchen, where Donna was making dinner. "Mom," Chloe exclaimed, holding the letter out. "I got in." Dana's face lit up with pride. She pulled Chloe into a tight hug, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, sweetie. You've worked so hard for this." As Chloe hugged her mom back, she felt a surge of gratitude, not just for Dana's support, but for the journey that had brought them here. The bus stop, the fights, the victories. It had all been part of a path that led to this moment. Looking ahead, on her first day at the Fine Arts program, Chloe walked into the studio with her sketchbook in hand and her heart full of hope. The walls were lined with canvases, the air humming with creativity. She found an empty easel and began to set up, her mind already racing with ideas. This was her new beginning, a place where she could explore her passions, share her voice, and continue to grow. As she picked up her pencil and began to sketch, Chloe smiled to herself. She had come so far, and she knew there was still so much ahead of her. The road wasn't always easy, but it was hers to walk, and for the first time, she felt ready to take every step.